Hi guys, welcome to Learn Tech from Zero. Today we will be covering further CCNA concepts. So let's just start with the CCNA. Okay, so today's topic will be layer 2 and layer 3 switches. We have already covered routers. So let's begin with layer 2 and layer 3 switches. So what is a switch? So a switch is a networking device that connects devices in a LAN. It works at layer 2 of the OSI model, but some of them works at layer 3. Its main job is to forward frames based on MAC addresses. So let's just simplify this section. So a switch is a networking device that connects to different devices in a LAN. So what is a LAN? LAN is a local area network. So for example, anything before the router is a LAN. So for example, before you access internet, anything before that section is LAN. Like you can see there are three different computers connected to this router. So before you access the internet, this part is LAN. At your home environment, you everything your home environment is a LAN itself, and before you access the internet, that's we call it as WAN. So WAN, wide area network. So you are connecting to different external networks outside your router. So that's WAN. So before the router, we call it LAN, which is a private area which you can control. All right. So that's a LAN, and so it works at layer 2 and layer 3 of the OSI model. We I have already covered what OSI model is. OSI is a conceptual model. Um, so with if you understand what OSI model is, then you will understand how data flows from one device to another device. So OSI model is a conceptual concept to understand how communication happens, how data flows from devices to devices, and through internet and everything. So OSI model is a reference model, and you need to understand OSI model to actually understand how networking and internet works. So make sure you watch other videos. I will also cover OSI model later on as well. So it works at layer 2 OSI model and then layer 3. So we will cover that in the later video. So a normal switch can cover layer 2, and if a switch has advanced features, then it can cover layer 3 as well. We will look into it later. And then it forward frames based on MAC addresses. So router, they normally communicate using IP addresses, if I have already explained in the previous video. But switch, they normally communicate between devices using MAC addresses. Let's say, for example, at your home environment, okay, let's say you are sending an email from your computer. Maybe let's say you are in one room and your partner is in a separate room, and then you are sending an email to your partner. So she is within that LAN. She is not in a different network because you guys are located within the router, within the local area network. So as she is next door, the communication will happen not using the IP address, it will happen using the um, MAC address. If the MAC address, and also your router has switch capabilities. So if you look at your router, at your home router, you will see that your broadband router has 3 or 4 connections. So your router has a switch functionality, and the communication happens between those devices using MAC address. So a MAC address is it's normally it's the unique identifier of your devices. So they come built in. So if you look at your phone, your computers, and other devices, other network devices, you will find MAC addresses. So all the communication within a LAN happen using MAC addresses. If you are communicating with a LAN, if you're not communicating to using the internet, using the router to a different networks, if you're communicating within your local area, normally the communication happens using LAN. Sorry, using MAC address if there is a switch added in the network. If you have any questions, it might sound a bit confusing for some people. If you have any questions, make sure to comment so that I can explain it to you, because no matter how much I explain, there will still be some confusion. So the more you ask questions, you can clear out those confusions. So, no matter how good your lecturer is, there will always be questions, because you cannot cover internet routing, networking, switching with very simple languages. So I try to use real life examples, but there will still be questions. So make sure that you ask questions if you don't understand. So we have layer 2 switch. So there are two types of switch: layer 2 and layer 3 switch. So layer 2 switch is, it works at the OSI layer, data link layer. So layer 2, they always communicate using MAC address. So layer 2 switch, they normally communicate using MAC address. MAC address is the unique identifier of your network devices. All devices have a separate MAC addresses. And then switch 2, how they communicate using MAC address is basically, what they have a MAC address table. So within a switch looks like this. So what they do is, within a switch, they build a MAC address table. So um, for example, if you want to send a message to someone in the local area network, and what the switch will do is, let's say PC 1 is sending a message to PC 5, like a computer 1 sending a message to computer 5, and they're in two different locations within the local area network. Let's say, when we say local area network, which means, let's just use a business example where you have two separate buildings. Even though those two buildings are separate, we have to call it a LAN, because we are using the same networking architecture to cover those two buildings. So it's a local area network, because you control those two buildings communication before it reaches the internet. So for example, if you want to send a message from a computer from building A to building B, right? It will check the MAC address table within the switch. So the switch will check if the address is located in its MAC address table. I'll just quickly show you how this works. So this is a simple network diagram. Don't worry about it. So this is a router, this is a switch, this is another switch. These are three computers connected to the switch. So don't worry about it for too much for now. We will be creating those sort of diagrams in the future. So let's just check how we can check MAC address table. So for example, a switch, they normally create MAC address table within themselves. So I'm just going to enable it, don't worry, and then I'll be like, show MAC address table. This is shortcut, but you can also use full form, but don't worry about it now. So I'm just going to click that now. Sorry, I made a mistake. So show MAC address table. All right, so you can see that this switch has two MAC address tables. So it has a record of two MAC addresses, and those two MAC addresses can be communicated via these ports. So this switch has two physical gigabit ports. So for example, if a computer sends a message to MAC address 0001644994E19 within the LAN, the switch will check the MAC address table, and then it will send that message through that port. So this is how switches work. They normally check the MAC address table, and if the information is already in the MAC address table, they will just use that port to send the data. If the switch doesn't have the information in the MAC address table, then they will basically flood it through all their ports to find the MAC address table. We will cover that later on, don't worry about it now. So let's just go to the next section. So that's the layer 2 switch. They normally do MAC address table, forwards frames within the same VLAN. This is this is a virtual local area network that we will cover later on. So you can create instead of creating separate networks within your existing physical network, you can create virtual networks where you don't even have to separate those physical devices from each other. You can just create a virtual network using switches. So switches, they have the functionality to create virtual networks, so virtual local area network, VLAN. So make sure that you remember. We will be configuring them in the later video, so don't worry about it for now. Support VLANs but cannot route between them. So you can create VLAN using layer 2 switch, but you cannot route, like you cannot create communication within those VLANs. We will cover that later as well. Okay, limitation, cannot understand IP address, because only routers, they understand IP address. So router is a layer 3 device. So layer 2 switch, they cannot understand IP address. It cannot route between different subnets and VLANs. If you have any questions, send me a message. So we will not get into too much details because it will get confusing. We will cover all these subnets, VLANs later on in the videos. Inside example, don't worry about this. Okay, this is the layer 2 switch. So layer 2 switch, in general, what they do is MAC address. So they read the MAC address and they sense the communication between devices using MAC address. It uses the MAC address table, and then it can create VLAN, but the communication cannot happen between those VLANs using layer 2. And okay, that's it for now. So layer 2, let's just start with layer 3. So there are two kind of switches. One is a layer 2 switch and layer 3 switch. So layer 3 switch is similar to a router. So layer 3 switch is basically a switch, basically a layer 2 switch with routing capabilities. So a layer 3 switch means a layer 2 switch plus router. So you can actually use IP addresses with layer 3 switch. So the layer 2 switch doesn't use IP addresses, it doesn't understand IP addresses, but layer 3 switch does. So this is what you need to learn. So there are two types of switches, layer 2 and layer 3. The difference between layer 2 and layer 3 is layer 2 does not understand IP addresses. It cannot communicate between different VLANs or different subnets, and the communication happen using MAC addresses. So, and it reads its MAC address table from its memory. So that's layer 2. And layer 3 is, it has everything that layer 2 has plus routing. So plus routing capability. So a layer 3 function. It can communicate between different VLANs and subnets. So we will cover that later on. VLANs and subnet is a part of LAN, local area network. It's a part of LAN. So what we do is we create separate virtual LANs, or we can create separate subnets and etc. We will cover them later on, so don't worry about it now. Today's video is all about what are switches and what kind of switches we have and what are the difference between switches. So switches, you know, I've already explained, and there are two types of switches, layer 2, layer 3. So layer 2 is got limitation. Layer 3 is more advanced. It does everything the layer 2 does, plus it does the same functionality as the router, almost the same functionality as the router, because it can understand IP addressings. It can communicate between different VLANs and subnets. It uses IP routing protocols. So we have already explained this in the previous video, but we will also explain every single one of them in the future videos. But layer 3 protocols are these, where the communication happens using IP addresses, and we need to know this kind of routing protocols, like where you can manually create those routes, the communication, how the routers should communicate between different devices, or how a switch layer 3 switch should communicate between other networks and devices. We will cover them later on, don't worry about it for too much for now. So that's layer 2, layer 3. So layer 3 is not a router itself. It has the routing capability, but we should not use a layer 3 switch for accessing the internet. Layer 3 switches is really good for communication. The main purpose of layer 3 switch is that it can communicate different between different VLANs, and it can communicate between different subnets. So that's the main purpose of layer 3 switch. If you don't know what VLAN is, if you don't know what subnet is, we will cover them in the later videos. I also have like existing videos about those terms, so make sure you watch other videos to understand. If you don't understand, you can leave a question. If you're confused, leave a comment. So these are the difference between layer 2 and layer 3 switch. So what are key differences in within a table? So if this table simplifies everything that I've discussed. So layer 2 switch is in the OSI model layer 2. Layer 3 switches does layer 2 and 3. Everything what a layer 2 does plus 3, almost has the same capability as the router. It forwards using MAC address. This is the communication. So basically it sends messages and receives messages using MAC address, the device's unique identifier, which you normally get built in from your like for example, if you have a Samsung phone, you will already have a MAC address built into your phone, which was provided by your Samsung brand. So that's what it does. The communication happens using the MAC address. Layer 3, the communication happens using the MAC address and plus the IP address. Inter-VLAN routing. Inter-VLAN routing means when we communicate between different VLANs. So using a layer 2, it's not possible. Using a layer 3, it's possible. So you can communicate between different VLANs using layer 3. It does not support any routing protocols. It does support routing protocols. What are routing protocols? How they work, etc. We will cover them in the later videos. Don't worry about it for now. Typical use: basic LAN switching, large LAN, VLAN to VLAN routing. It's just the layer 2 switches for just basic switching configuration. So layer 3 does VLAN, communication between subnets, communication between different VLANs, and then it understands IP address, and so it's more advanced than layer 2. Speed, don't worry about this. Okay, so real life example. These are some real life examples, like the model numbers. Okay, so some tips. Remember, layer 2 switch, MAC address only. Layer 3 switch, MAC address plus IP. These are the key differences. Routers versus layer 3 switches. So what's the difference between a router and what's the difference between a layer 3 switch? Both route between subnets, but routers are for WAN edge, but while layer 3 switches are for inter-VLAN routing. So that's what I've explained previously. Routers and layer 3 switches are very common. Sorry, they're very similar to each other, but the main purpose of the router is to communicate with external networks, to communicate with the internet. And the main purpose of the layer 3 switch is to communicate between different VLANs, to communicate between different subnets. So it's basically when you have an existing LAN and then you either create a subnet or you either create a VLAN to make sure that you guys can communicate within each other, different departments, different sections within that LAN can communicate with each other. Layer 3 switch is important. Inter-VLAN routing, it can be done with both, either router 3 and router or layer 3 switch. Inter-VLAN routing is when you communicate between different VLANs or different subnets. Using a router, you don't worry about this one now. This is basically to make inter-VLAN routing happen using a router. You use the method called router on a stick, which we will cover later. And to communicate between different VLANs and subnets, you need a layer 3 switch, which is called SVI, switch virtual interfaces. We will show you how this works in the later videos. And this is just a bit extra information. I don't think you have to worry about it too much. It's just like there are two types of switches, like apart from hold on a second. So these are the features, layer 2 and layer 3. So there are two types of features outside this networking world, like in small business companies or even at home. You can you can use an unmanaged switch. So an unmanaged switch is basically a very normal switch. You just plug it and it works. All the ports are the same. There are no VLANs, no security, nothing. And managed switch is something that the company, the enterprise uses. So managed switch, you can, why it's called managed, you can manage it using, you can basically log into the route switch using CLI or remotely or any other way. There are many ways which we will cover in the later video. So basically, unmanaged switch, you cannot log in, you cannot manage them. It's already its functionalities are already decided. So it's just for basic use. You cannot manage it. You cannot log into it and change the configuration. So with managed switch, you can log into it. You can create VLANs. You can create securities. You can monitors. You can give priorities to voice and video. This is QoS, quality of service, that we will cover later on. So how to give priority, like how to prioritize video and audio than your normal data. So you need to know this. We will cover this in the later video. So managed switches are used in schools, companies, and data centers, where you need to have separate networks, separate LANs, VLANs, where you want to control more, where there could be a lot of security issues. So stuff like that. Um, so I think that's it for now. If you have any questions, make sure that you leave a comment, and I will definitely get back to you with a good explanation. I really want everyone to understand those concepts. If anything is confusing, make sure that you comment, and I will explain it to you. I do repeat a lot of things a few times. It's just because that I want to make sure that everybody understands. So if people who are not good with technology, or people who don't speak good English, I try to keep it very simple. And also I repeat all the time, so that I basically try to put this in your head. So I'm just here to help you out. So if you really like my content, I would really appreciate a follow. And I will see you soon with the next topic, which will be, bear with me 1 second, which will be next generation firewall and IPS. Until then, thanks for your time, and I'll see you soon.